Hey everyone, welcome to another Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony D, and today we're going to talk about sports movies. Now, when you're writing a sports movie, you usually have two sort of subcategories of those movies. It's either usually a comedy or a drama. I don't think there's been a horror movie about sports. Maybe one somewhere that I never heard of. Mystery, probably not. Maybe a little romance is thrown in there, but usually it's a drama or a comedy. You got, on the comedy end, you have, Bull Durham, which is sort of a comedy dramedy. You've got, what the hell? Oh, God. The movie just escaped my brain. The Charlie Sheen one, where he's the pitcher. You know what I mean. There's a bunch of them. And then the drama ones, they're typically, like the Al Pacino one, and there's been like a million of them too. I'm not really a sports guy, so that's not my thing. I don't write sports dramas. It's not, I just don't dig sports, but a lot of you out there dig sports, so just like any other subject matter, you got to know it. So me writing a sports drama would probably be a disaster. I would need someone in my circle, if it was my producer who was hiring me. Hopefully I could just ask all the questions of the producer about the sport and get the answer I needed. I mean, I could write it as long as I had that person, access to that person whenever I had a question. But that's my weakness. So a lot of you out there are sports nuts. I'm sure you know baseball inside out, or football, or whatever you know. You need to know it inside out because you need to know what goes on the field. Okay? You need to Moneyball. That was a good one, based after the book. A lot of these sports movies are based after true stories, like Moneyball, like the Penn State movie. Obviously that's a slightly different animal in that you're basing it after true events. So you kind of have a series of events that you're going to build a movie around, and you're going to have to know those events very well. But if you're doing like a fictionalized version of a sports drama, like a TV show like Friday Night Lights, you just need to know the sport really well. And the kind of people who are in it and what they do every day. They follow the same basic 3-act structure. So the first act is going to be the establishing act. You're going to establish the sport, the team, the dynamic between, the protagonist and whoever that is. Now, it's slightly different if it's like a coach figure as opposed to a player figure or a combination of both. So sometimes in the comedies, it's kind of the players versus the coaches, or it's a coach that, is a little different from all the other coaches, kind of like the way Brad Pitt was in Moneyball. And, it depends. But you must establish that dynamic in the first act. We have to know what the deal was. In Moneyball, it was all about, the A's were having trouble, and it was about this new concept of using mathematics to augment your chances in a baseball game, which was a fascinating subject, and I loved the movie. And again, I'm not a sports guy. I mean, I watched it. I was, riveted because I was learning something that I did not know. And I'm sure even if you know about baseball, the details of that would be of interest to you. So that's what you're dealing with. So that first act, you're going to lay out that groundwork, that new element that's going to drive the drama or the comedy. In the Charlie Sheen movie, it was because he was a wild thing and he had a wild pitch, and they had a bunch of crazy misfits on the team, and how they're going to win the championship and all that. Second act is usually the most fun act, whether it's a drama or a comedy. It's all about how the team's winning, usually. you know. In Rocky, the Rocky movies, or in the Creed movie, it's about the training and the various fights and hurdles leading up to the big fight or the big game, if it's another sport. So training is definitely going to be a part of the movie. In the 80s, we would do a montage. They're kind of out of vogue, so you probably want to stay away from them. You want to do something that's a little more less on the nose, you know. You want to show them training, show scenes of people training where maybe they're training and then other things are happening as well, you know. You could have a scene where the training's finishing up and we get a little taste of the romance that may be brewing between a player and his romantic interest, or, you know, in the case of Creed, you know, Creed and his girlfriend, or, you know, in the case of Rocky and Adrian. So we want that drama to start to unfold. And so one's going to be the establishing, the act one's going to be the establishing thing. Act two is going to be really a lot of setup for the big payoff. So a lot of times in sports movies, it's all about this big payoff at the big game or the big fight or the big ending. So a lot of the first two acts are set up for that. So we get, you know, the setup, how important the game is. What are the chances of the protagonist winning? What are going to be the consequences if they lose? You know, how important is this game? They're putting it all on the line. Is this destroying their relationship? Is it strengthening their relationship? Is the romantic relationship helping this situation or hurting it? Or is it both? You know, in a drama, it kind of be both. In a comedy, it goes back and forth. You know, it kind of depends. But you definitely want to drill down into the sport and know the sport backwards and forwards. And finally, the final game or fight, winning or losing, at this point in movies, you know, it can kind of go either way. In the old days, it would be usually a win. But now there is, you know, a take with a lot of movies. There's nobility in losing. There's nobility in just being in the championship. There's nobility in overcoming other stuff that led to the big game or fight or whatever. So it's not always about winning the game. Part of the problem with that is winning the game is kind of boring. You know, if you just win the game, because it's a fake game ultimately, and the audience kind of knows that. So you really have to sell. If you're going to have the characters win, you're going to have to really sell how amazing that win is, right? You're going to have to make it look pretty dark and then have this amazing comeback that is, on the one hand, unexpected, but on the other hand, realistic enough to have actually happened based on the information we've seen in a movie, right? So if it's a situation where the characters are just winning and winning and winning and then they win the big game, that's kind of boring. But if they win most of the games and then nearly blow it, and, you know, that's why usually something happens towards the end of the second act where one of the big players gets into trouble. Either he may not make the big game, or he's injured, or, you know, he's distracted, he breaks up with his girlfriend, or, you know, something is going to happen to raise the stakes at that last big game. So usually in these movies you can tell they're going to win if they had to overcome all that kind of stuff to even play the game. That's usually an indication they're going to win. That they're going to lose is kind of the opposite. Usually if you don't see that kind of setup, you know, and they end up losing because it wasn't enough of a hurdle to justify from an emotional standpoint in the movie. And so you have the characters lose because it's a little more unexpected, but at the same time you have an emotional justification for it. You know, maybe all the characters become friends. Even though they lost the game, they played their best. And, you know, sportsmanship is a big theme in these movies. And you want to have that kind of sportsmanship in a sports movie. You know, you don't want to have a character that cheats and wins. that undermines the character. You know, you can have a character die even. If you look at the Clint Eastwood boxing movie. Oh, man. I really should look up these titles before I shoot these videos. You know the one I mean. Where she, spoiler, where she dies at the end. So, you know, that movie, oh, what a great sports drama that is. And it's not only about her transformation, but Clint Eastwood's transformation as well. You know, he's sort of brought out of that bitter place he's in, and he you know, becomes the great coach he could be, and believes in sports again, believes in hope again, and then he has to make, man, the ultimate sacrifice. And very powerful movie. Clint Eastwood really knows how to make movies. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. I mean, I can't think of a bad movie he's made. I mean, I haven't seen them all, so some of the subject matter doesn't always appeal to me, but man, every movie I've seen of his just been pretty glorious. Even that movie, which is not, again, I'm not a sports guy, and I'm not even so much a drama guy. I prefer comedies or action. And that movie's just, it's hard not to watch. It's so riveting. So the drama or the comedy is going to be central, and the sport is going to be central. So you really need those elements down pat in a sports movie. But now that I think about it, there really hasn't been a sports horror movie. I think we really need one. That would be an interesting mix. If you could somehow jam those two elements together. God. Somebody write in the comments if there's been a sports horror movie. Because that to me is a whole new subgenre that needs to be explored. A sports horror movie. Somebody should write that. I would see that. A sports horror movie. There was The Last Boy Scout, which wasn't much of a sports movie, and it wasn't a horror movie, but it was kind of a action movie, mystery sports movie. Yeah. But it didn't have a lot of sports in it. There was some. You know, it would barely qualify as a sports movie. There's just enough sports in it that, you know, it's central to the plot. But it's not like, you know, the stuff that happens outside the sport is really the main thrust of that. I feel that it's an underrated movie. I always liked The Last Boy Scout, Bruce Willis and Damon Wayans. Again, Shane Black, another one of my faves. So, but, you know, in terms of sports, you know, they've definitely done romance. I mean, romance is usually a part of the sports realm, but they haven't, I don't think they've done straight up romance, really. It kind of, I think those two genres, romance and sports, if sports is a movie genre, really, because sports are competitive, it would be kind of hard to mix them. Also because the two genders tend not to compete in sports, so that would be really tough. I think it's possible. I mean, you could have, you know, maybe a gay romance and two characters who are in sports. I mean, that would make more sense than a man and a woman in the same sport, also in love, you know. I can't really think of what sport that would make any sense. Maybe an Olympic thing. Yeah. But, you know, crossing over the sports genre with other things. The nice thing about a sports movie is you have a built-in audience. You know, I had a client approach me about a movie. I won't say, you know, it was confidential, so I won't say the sport, but he had a really good premise. Very rarely I'm approached by a client who says, I have this great premise, and I thought, how good could the premise be? Most of my clients come to me with terrible premises, but I took a meeting and it was a really solid premise. But then I told him, you know, what it takes to make a movie and what you have to do and what I would do and how I could help them. And, you know, it's very disillusioning for people who don't understand the movie industry to understand how hard it is to get a movie made. You know, unless you have, you know, a few $1 million burning a hole in your pocket, the chances of your movie getting made are very slim. It's very difficult. But I would recommend, if you are a sports fan and you know a sport and you got a good idea, I think a sports drama or comedy is definitely something that would be great to write as a spec script, something that is very sellable, always sellable, because there's always a market. You know, assuming you're doing a drama about a sport that people like. I mean, if you're going to do a drama about curling, it's a little more esoteric. You know, there's been dramas about horse racing and you know, car racing and football and baseball. You know, all the big ones, the ones that are in soccer. There haven't been a tremendous amount ones about soccer. I imagine that would be huge. I mean, Bend It Like Beckham was one. My favorite sports movie would be, and if you haven't seen it, you should totally see it, is Shaolin Soccer, which is about a group of Shaolin monks who end up on a soccer team, and it's kind of a crazy martial arts and comedy sport movie. So the martial arts sort of slips in there, and it's very funny, and it's got sort of crazy effects with the monks using their martial arts in the soccer game. So that's a lot of fun, and but yeah, soccer movie, you know, like that. You know, I'm surprised Hollywood hasn't done a big movie like that. You know, for the international audiences, I'm sure they would love it, because soccer really is the biggest sport in the world. So, but you know, you're going to do a movie about cricket. That's tough. It's tough. It's going to be especially tough to sell in America. It's just not a sport we even understand here, much less are fans of. So you want to pick a sport that's pretty well known, that's aimed at your audience, and one that you know. And if you've played it before, or if you have connections to a real player or a real story, that can be great too. Well, anyhow, I got something playing in the other room that just kicked up. I'm going to get to that. That's it for Screenwriting Tips this week. Smash like, as PewDiePie says, if you liked it. Leave a comment. I'm running out of genres to talk about. And if you want me to talk about any kind of script writing, if you got questions, let me know. I'm at Patreon, and you can also check me out at the Web Comic Factory and Superfrat. We'll see you next time.